Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of Only as Lonely, the podcast that shares the story of my solo trip around the world, taking photos, playing music, and all the funny little interactions that happen in between. I'm not going to explain the backstory of this. It happened in episode 1. This is only episode 2, so it's not a lot really. You're not going to miss much by going back one episode, are you? I had some lovely feedback based on that first episode, which is great, much appreciated. So thank you to those of you who listened, and I hope that many other people enjoy and join me on this journey. If you want to also check out onlyaslonely.wordpress.com, you can see photos and clips of my trip, and maybe even some music as well. I'm trying to create something that's multimedia, without trying to sound too much like 1996, as my friend Andy pointed out. It sounds like something that would be mentioned on an AOL dial-up internet disc from back in the day. So, it's day 2 in New York, and I've only been here 5 minutes, and I've already felt lonely, and I've already had an awkward altercation with a drunk man who wanted to bet me that I smoked, even though I really don't. That was awkward. But day 2 was all about sightseeing and getting the most out of my New York pass, which is so good. If you want to go to New York, I really recommend that you get a New York pass. It gives you discounts. It gets you into a lot of the main sites. You can jump the queue. Yeah, if you can milk it for everything you can get, then you will definitely get your money's worth. I'm not sponsored by the New York Pass, by the way, because, I think you need at least more than 3 listeners to get sponsorship. So I'm a bit off yet. Give it time. Who knows? Let's jump straight into day 2. Here we go. Day 2, September the 10th, 2009. I was awoken at about 3:30 a.m. by some guy entering my room. Fortunately, this was my roomie / cellmate. Like I said in the previous episode, my room was pretty basic, had bars on the window, and offered less in the way of amenities than a standard prison cell. So, apart from the amenity of being completely free and to come and go as you please, I suppose that's a pretty big deal, really, isn't it? Is it really fair to compare it to a prison cell? I don't know. Anyway, I digress. I was only awake for a minute or two, but still I said hello to him, as you would do. You'd say hello to another human being who was going to be sleeping in close proximity to you, wouldn't you? It's a decent thing to do. I got a grunt in response, so immediately I thought, must be German. I don't know why I had such a blinkered view of Germans, if I'm honest. Looking back on the whole trip, the Germans that I came across were the most friendly, lovely, warm people that I met. Now, I don't know the guy's name, but because I assumed he was German, we'll call him Hans. And let me tell you that Hans could snore with the best of them. Oh, yeah. He woke me up, and it was like having a mating walrus on the bottom bunk. You couldn't ignore that. I tried the subtle cough, how English of me. And then I tried the louder cough. Ugh! I then tried kicking the shit out of the mattress, but that didn't work either. I wasn't going to shout at him to wake him up, because he might not have taken too kindly to that. And although combat strategy dictates that having the higher ground is an advantage, I don't think the same can be said about being on the top bunk of a rickety bunk bed. I wasn't even sure, that he could speak English anyway, based on the grunt I got. It wasn't really an English type of grunt. So I climbed out of bed, down the ladder, reached for the earplugs. Fortunately, that did the trick. At 6:30, I got up and got ready. I left my sleeping roomie and went to grab breakfast. But the breakfast on offer at the hostel, to be honest, it was pretty shit. It was just bagels and coffee. I don't understand bagels. What's the benefit of having a great big hole in the middle? I just don't get it. Any kind of filling, then it can't really be contained, can it? So I took the coffee and hit the streets. My first stop was going to be the Empire State Building, one of the main landmarks of the Big Apple. Luckily, I had my New York pass, which allowed me to access so many attractions, and I was able to jump the queue. Had there been much of a queue at 8 a.m. in the morning? I mean, I think I must have leapfrogged, at least 7 people. You go up in a lift so far and then have to change into another lift to get to the top. This was the biggest building I'd ever been in, and I'm not great with heights as it is, and I don't really like lifts, so not really a winning combination there. I was thinking positive thoughts all the way up. Doesn't help that I have a vivid memory of back in the day reading the Mirror newspaper that my dad brought back from work. Obviously, he must have left the Daily Sport, at work. But there was an article about 2 people who were in a lift in the Empire State Building when it suddenly dropped, and then they were in free fall. And there was even an artist's impression of 2 people seemingly floating inside the lift. But they weren't floating, no, they were plummeting towards the ground and heading straight towards broken bones and A&E. It's funny how some things stick with you, isn't it? I breathed deeply and hoped for the best. Obviously, as you're hearing this now, you can tell that, yes, there wasn't an engineering fault and I survived, thankfully. It was great to be on such an iconic building, and I thought I'd be more nervous with the height, but you know what, I was actually okay. It was a shame that there were these large cages in the way that don't give you a totally clear view, but that's better than, being able to lean a little too far over the edge. And it was probably the reason why I felt okay up there. To be exposed to the view with no protection would have had me shaking like a shitting Jack Russell again. So it was just as well. I have been known to shake and be very nervous on top of the turrets at Warwick Castle. I mean, this was just a few feet higher. It was an overcast day and very windy up there, and I was feeling rather cold. I took a few photos and had to ask other tourists to take my picture. With my camera, obviously, asking them to take a picture of me with theirs, that would just be weird. I took 2 cameras with me. I took my main digital SLR camera, and the other was a small, easy-to-use point-and-shoot camera that also had the option to record footage. It was much cheaper than the SLR, much easier to use, and less likely to be stolen. So that would be the one that I'd ask other people to use. However, for the first picture I wanted taken, I'd left the camera on movie mode, so I'm posing with a cheesy smile, and the French lady had to ask me what's wrong with the camera. I kept that clip because I always find it funny.
It's not a picture, it's a...
Is it a camcorder?
Yes.
I was happy to be on the Empire State Building and was glad that I'd gone first thing because it was soon starting to fill up and get busy. On the way out, I used the New York pass to take the Sky Tour. What's that, Dan? Some sort of helicopter trip around Manhattan? No, well, yeah, it was sort of. Not quite. This comprised of a few rows of tiered chairs that move, whilst you watch a film from a helicopter of touring around New York that's narrated by Kevin Bacon. He gets everywhere, doesn't he? It was all right. It was a bit cheesy, I'm paraphrasing, but it was like, okay, everyone, hold on tight as we go on the Sky Tour. All right, Kevin, calm down. I mean, it's not like we're actually in a helicopter. I'm on a wobbly chair watching a big telly. It also included, as a tribute, a fly around the Twin Towers, which was such a dominant feature on the Manhattan skyline. There must have been quite the spectacle to see in real life. And I felt sad, thinking about the tragedy that took place almost exactly 8 years to the day. The fact that they kept the footage in led me to believe that they didn't really have any alternative footage to show and were trying to extend the ride to something that people wouldn't then complain about. Having left the Empire State Building, I was feeling a bit peckish, so I found a deli and sat in the window eating a Philly cheese steak burrito. I remember feeling really chuffed. There was something really cool about ordering in a deli and eating a burrito in this illustrious city. I mean, it's only the same as ordering a bacon sandwich in the cafe, back home, but this was much cooler, much cooler. I couldn't wait to order eggs that were over easy, whatever that meant. I then headed to Madison Square Garden for a tour there at 11 o'clock. How I spent my time in New York would be determined by what the New York Pass gave me access to and the locations of these places, so I'd plot a little route. This tour was also included in the pass, Madison Square Garden was not what I expected. The only stadium I'd ever been to before was when I was about 7 and I saw West Bromwich Albion play football. I was sat on an uncomfortable bar that was for standing fans to lean on. I was being held up by my dad, and as I wasn't really that interested in football, I was pretty bored and my arse was going to sleep. MSG, that's Madison Square Garden, not the chemical they put in Pringles, is nothing like that. For a start, no yam-yams shouting abuse, but it was huge and round, and wherever you sat you had a great view. It was like the perfect stadium for sports and music. We were led around by this guy who, although he was a good guide, he was just on the subconscious replay mode, regurgitating the same spiel over and over again. He was knowledgeable, but you could tell that his heart really wasn't in it anymore. We went to the main stadium, where a stage was being built for the Jay-Z concert later that evening. I was equally impressed by the smaller concert hall underneath, which was soundproofed so well that you can have a stand-up comic show in there and not hear the Bon Jovi concert going on upstairs, which, personally, can only be a good thing. I don't include Living on a Prayer in that, which, of course, is a classic. We went into a bar area, and a cheerleader came out and gave a little talk, and then there was a chance for a photo opportunity. She was gorgeous, but why would I want my picture taken with her? It's not as if I can brag that this was a girl that I managed to pull in New York, is it? No, it'd be a case of, hey everyone, look at this incredibly hot girl I managed to get my picture taken with. I thought it was a bit sad. As we left the basketball changing rooms, it was clear that the guy did not get my sarcastic sense of humour when I brought up the movie Godzilla, because in the movie Godzilla hides in tunnels underneath Madison Square Garden. So, it's a fair question, I think, if you ask the guide, are there large tunnels under here and could Godzilla realistically hide in there? I mean, I managed to keep a straight face throughout, so I'm guessing he didn't really catch on that I was taking the piss. He said he didn't know and looked at me very strangely. After Madison Square Garden, nearby was Macy's, very famous place, Macy's, so I walked in there and I walked straight back out again. I mean, it's just a big department store like Selfridges or Debenhams or House of Fraser, but others would disagree, but that wasn't what I was in New York for. So I headed up to check out the bus tours, the tour buses, where I'd been entitled to a discount, but I still found it a bit pricey, and I thought, you know what, I'll just plod along and make my own way to places that I wanted to see. I started to take some photos, and I could tell that it would be a while until I got my eye in. I briefly felt odd as I wandered around the streets, because I wondered what to do. I wasn't going to sit in a bar on my own all evening, and the attractions were only open during the day, so would I get bored in New York, especially with no one to hang out with? But I had to shake myself out of it. I had to carry on ticking boxes. Come on, Dan. You're going to experience New York here. Come on, son. First, though, I decided to call my Auntie Carol. I was really struggling with the phones. They didn't seem to work. I followed the instructions to call internationally, but it wasn't until I spoke to someone, I think they were Japanese, and asked them how they did it. And then they told me I needed to buy a phone card with credit on it from a news vendor. So I found a nearby news vendor, bought a card, and I managed to call Carol from Times Square. And after all that faffing about, she wasn't in. She was out. Unbelievable. It was when I finished the call that I noticed that my bag had been opened. That sudden adrenaline dump, that heavy feeling in the pit of my stomach, oh my God, it was horrible. I frantically looked in my bag to see if anything had been taken, but fortunately, nothing was missing. I then engineered a way of tying the toggles with 2 zips on my rucksack together to make it more difficult for someone to get into it. To gain entry now would need incredible dexterity, speed, and skill, akin to someone completing a Crystal Maze challenge with just 30 seconds to go. I mean, great for security, but now it was a right pain in the arse for me to get into my bag. I grabbed a hot dog from a stand. I had to get that done, tick another box, because hot dogs from a corner in New York is so much more authentic than a hot dog from a sweaty woman with dirty fingernails in the van that parks on the nearby B&Q car park back home. I then headed to Central Park Zoo. It was a nice place. I got chatting to a photographer there. I remember being outside an enclosure for a snow leopard, and we were in the dark. We were like in a viewing area. in the dark with big windows looking into the enclosure at these snow leopards. And there was a hummingbird also in there that was trying to get out through the glass. He was struggling as he couldn't get out, and he was determined to get through, bless him. I mean, I was going to help. I thought, I'll smash the window, help him out. But fortunately, someone else stepped forward and picked up the little bird who was exhausted and then took him outside and set him free. I really hope he recovered and didn't get eaten. I then wandered past the polar bears and watched the display from the sea lions, which was great, considering that I was essentially in a prison for animals. I sat down on a bench in a circular area, contemplating what to do next. On a bench to my right, there was a young mother and her toddler, and I got chatting to them. And then shortly afterwards, a lady on a bench to the left started talking to us. And we were having a banter, and then when the young mum left, I and the other lady continued to have a chat. She was also visiting New York. She was from Carolina. She was there because her other half was in a business meeting. He's English as well. Her name was Tracy, and she was also at a bit of a loose end. So I took an opportunity. I said, well, do you want to hang out, grab a coffee? And she said, yeah. And so we found a small independent coffee shop called Starbucks and sat in the window watching the New York people go by. And we were having a great time. We had a good laugh. Tracy, she's so easygoing, really chilled out. And it was nice to meet someone and enjoy their company. I think I needed some decent interaction with someone, It's just a conversation. Still, it meant so much. She took a call from a boyfriend. His meeting had finished and he was coming to meet us. So we met him outside the coffee shop. And in his flash suit, I remember vividly how he just looked me up and down like I was some piece of shit. Okay, so my flat cap and Led Zeppelin t-shirt combination may not have been to his liking. Now, for those astute listeners who listened to episode 1, you may have remember that I was wearing a Led Zeppelin t-shirt. That yes, it was the same Led Zeppelin t-shirt. But let me be clear, I was travelling, right? I didn't have a massive wardrobe that I could take with me. As long as I wasn't sweating and smelly and dirty, then yeah, I might get a couple of days out of a t-shirt. That's what you do when you're travelling, Don't judge me, all right? But I guarantee you, I always had clean socks and pants on. So there you go. Anyway, back to Tracy's boyfriend. I expected some kind of British brotherly comradeship. Sting said, I'm an Englishman in New York. We were English men in New York. I was like, great. It's going a fellow Brit. Hey, how you doing, brother? Yeah, great. No, he was just a smarmy twat. I was thinking, how does someone so lovely, friendly and warm like Tracy end up with this arse clap? We went our separate ways, and once again, I was left thinking how to fill my time. Any evening things I could do that would tick boxes, what could I do? I know. How about a comedy club? I headed back to Times Square, where I knew there were people selling tickets, and I bought a ticket for $10 and made my way across town on the subway to the Comic Strip, which is one of the best comedy clubs in New York, and has had performances from all of the top famous comedians when they were first starting out. And sometimes they still come back and visit and do sets there as well. This was the quintessential, fully authentic, no longer just something off the TV, premium comedy club experience. This was something I wanted to experience firsthand. And yes, it was a shame that I was going to be on my own, but sod it, I was going to embrace this. Outside the club was an awning that reached across the sidewalk, and to the road, so that people could catch a cab or get out of a cab and not get rained on. There was also a hum of activity as people were gathering, waiting to go in, or some were meeting friends, and others were probably going to be performing shortly and having a cigarette before the show begins. Inside, the walls were adorned with photos of famous comedians like Jerry Seinfeld, Eddie Murphy, George Carlin, Adam Sandler, Bill Burr, Louis C.K., Kevin Hart, Chris Rock, and loads more that, to be honest, I wasn't that familiar with. I headed into the first bar and bought a bottle of Corona.
You taking Nelly to the show?
Asked the barman. I was.
There's a 2-drink minimum, right?
I was aware of that.
Well, that one don't count.
Okay, great. Looks like I'm going to be buying 3 bottles of Corona tonight, yeah. $30 for 3 drinks. Oh well, what the hell, I thought. I'm going to enjoy this, because I was in one of the premium comedy clubs where comedians cut their teeth and go on to great things. You know, who knows, maybe I'll see a famous comedian trying out some of their new material. I entered the main room, which was starting to get busy. It was pretty dark apart from the lights on the stage, with the familiar brick wall background that I'd seen in so many clips of comedians on the internet. I was led to my own table that was in the middle of the room, slightly off-centre to the stage. But I took comfort looking around and seeing other people who sat on their own too. There was a really good feeling in the room, probably because everyone was there with all best intentions, and no one had gotten pissed yet. Which, I mean, to be fair, that would be a pretty expensive exercise. Sometimes American comedy can be a bit hit and miss. You know, it's a different kind of humour, and sometimes it just doesn't land with me, and I don't know what all the fuss is about. But I spent the rest of the night there, had my next 2 beers in front of the stage, and I've got to say, I laughed a lot. Maybe it was being part of the collective audience, you know, the swept up in the joy of it all. But it was great. There were 7 comedians that I saw, and there was still more to come by the time I left. And for those comedians performing, they could have been playing 3 shows that night at different clubs. I'd have loved to stay until the end, but I was getting tired, as it had been a long day. It was time to go. So the ticket had been cheap, the drinks had been expensive. But on the whole, it cost me about the same as a ticket and some drinks back home. But you'd only see 4 acts back home, so I couldn't really complain. I'd had a great time. Outside, it was pissing down, and I wasn't really an easy walking distance of the hostel. So I did something that I'd only ever seen on the telly. I flagged down a yellow cab in the rain, diving into oncoming traffic with my arm in the air. It took a few attempts, but eventually one stopped for me. That was another box ticked. Inside was a bit filthy, and there was a small cracked screen in front of my seat just bombarding me with adverts. The driver did not want to engage in conversation. It didn't take long to get back, and upon entering the cell, room, I met my roomie. But fortunately, it wasn't the same German roomie from the night before. Louis was a French guy and an exporter of wine for a chateau in Bordeaux. He wasn't a snorer, and he didn't grunt. He was a really good guy, and we talked into the early hours. I played him some of my EP off my iPod, and he said that he liked it and offered to let me stay with him and his family in Bordeaux and Paris. Wow! After one meeting, I'm getting invites to stay. It's not something I'm used to. But of course, I probably wouldn't be comfortable if I got chatting to someone in a pub back home, and then they offered for me to stay with them and their family in a 3-bed semi-detached ex-council house in Wolverhampton. I wondered if this was an openness amongst travellers or just a general warmth shown towards travellers. Would I stay with him? Yeah, why not? I thought. He said I'd have to get gigs in France. That could be a challenge, as I dropped French in year 9 at secondary school. I can say that I don't need a bag. Je n'ai pas besoin d'un sac. That's about as good as my French gets. For a brief period, when I was 12, I had a French pen pal. He sent me a picture. He had a centre parting. He had glasses, a very serious look on his face. And he had quite the moustache, let me tell you. Who's that bloke in that picture? My mother asked. It's my pen pal. He's 14, I said. There aren't many people in this world who can say that for a short time they were pen pals with the French version of Magnum P.I. The sad thing is that I still struggle to grow a moustache at the age of 28. Louis didn't have a moustache, but he did have the bottom bunk as per the strict bunk allocation policy of the hostel. So, would I stay with Louis and his family? On verra. I think that's how you say it. It's French for we'll see. I use Google Translate for it, so yeah. That's French for we'll see. And that's day 2. So there you have it, that's day 2. Reflections on that day. Well, my legs were knackered. I was starting to get my New York legs. They say that if you go to New York and you walk around everywhere, you definitely get your New York legs. I was definitely getting mine. And it was very much a day about just ticking boxes, try to experience as much of New York as possible. It was good. I think it's a combination of event and then a gap, wondering what to do and knowing who I was going to speak to or know if I was going to meet anyone or, there were little elements of loneliness, but I think the distractions kind of helped. Something else that dawns on me about this is that when I first started the trip, my family were all about, it's a very dangerous world out there. It's, and I think I'd kind of always been a little bit cynical of people. And today was a real mix because, I'd come across a couple of arseholes, but I'd also come across a couple of complete random strangers and gotten really well with them, and they were really nice, Maybe it was the start of an insight that people aren't really that bad. Most people are all right. And it was great to see the comedy club. I mean, that was just so good. It was so good to laugh. Great experience. Despite the expensive drinks, you'd pay a lot of money to get pissed in that place. Yeah, and so that's it. Thank you very much for listening. Another reminder, onlyaslonely.wordpress.com. I didn't take any photos on day one, so there probably won't be anything from day one on there, but you will certainly see something from day two, because then that's when I got my camera out. You know the drill. Like it, share it with anybody else who you think might enjoy this. And join me on day 3 for Only as Lonely, coming soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.